This is Paul Levy, author of the book Digital Inferno. This is the third podcast of a series looking at the issues that are arising around Brexit. That's the UK withdrawal from the European Union. And as I record this particular podcast, we have a deadline running down until April the 11th, where either an extension is going to be agreed or the EU is going to activate its decision, which would be that the UK would leave without a deal. And interestingly, given that this podcast is actually looking at the language, the words, the phrases that have been used right from the start of the whole Brexit issue quite a few years back, I've deliberately just mentioned the EU's decision for us to leave without a deal. Because what's often portrayed here is language which talks about it's the UK decision to leave without a deal. But what will actually be activated, unless there is some sort of extension agreed, is that it's the EU's decision that we won't be able to stay in the EU. So already, it's just as an example, we have language which on one side already suggests it's our decision to walk away, or it's the EU's decision for us not to be allowed to stay. And of course, that language does add up to a wider kind of view of the truth here, which is both are true. And yet when only one side is portrayed, we're not actually even beginning with the idea that we all have the ability, be that individuals, groups, societies, governments, to make decisions. And in this particular case, there are two sides. And it points to the fact that it may not be that one is leaving, but actually two are withdrawing or putting space between each other. And that already puts a different angle on this. So I just encourage you right from the start to look at the language that is being used to describe things here, and also look at the language that you are now adopting yourself, and at least be open to the possibility that the language you use is a particular point of view, and that if you looked at this issue from different points of view, using the language that others are using, you may get a better, clearer view of things. And that's an interesting concept to understand any complex situation, that the more points of view you look at, actually you may not be more confused, particularly if you think quite hard and give yourself time and don't be impatient about the thinking. But the more points of view, the more perspectives, actually the better quality picture you may get, which is what a lot of researchers do and call triangulation, where they try to validate their data from different angles of observation, collecting different data and seeing what joins up and what doesn't. In the case of Brexit, certainly April the 11th is twofold. It is a decision which is activated that the UK can no longer stay, and it is a decision then which has to be responded to in the UK about accepting that decision, maybe even agreeing and coinciding with that decision to leave, or to attempt to change that decision and seek an extension. There is also, of course, the possibility to seek the revocation of Article 50, where we stay within the EU. And when you look at that, you find other languages used that we're now being certainly invited by some people high up in the EU to seek a longer extension. And that is newer language that's come in more recently. Now, before I go into the detail of all that, I'm just starting this particular broadcast on the idea, therefore, that we should scrutinise the language we use, particularly if it's very simple. If it seems to capture an issue, it may have allowed us also to benefit from the simplicity that polarising things can bring. Either we're in or we're out. As George Bush Jr. once said, either you're with us or you're against us in the war in the Middle East where Kuwait had been invaded and the Americans had gone in. And that was very much polarised. Either you were on the side of the Americans or you weren't. But actually things like diplomacy and alternative views sometimes lie inconveniently between either or, sometimes called the binary choice, a bit like in computers where things are set to 1 or 0. And so right from the start of Brexit, to make sense of it, you may have to work harder, and you may be annoyed at that because it can take some effort to start to see the different points of view and the different language that's used. I've mentioned earlier also about the word Brexit itself, and Brexit goes back, if you didn't know, to Grexit, which was a time, I think it was between 2012 and 2015, when there was talk about the Greece, which was looking at the possibility of exiting the Eurozone. And there were similar conversations then about, was Greece going to leave or was it going to be thrown out? And it's very, very polarised and binary. And of course, in the longer run, those decisions were not easy. They were not as simple as that. And it was actually the spaces in between and the areas of compromise and looking for third ways, which can make your thinking work harder, but often is where solutions in the long run tend to lie. Now, we've got some other language floating around Brexit at the moment. And the thing I just find interesting to note when you look is as we've gone more and more into the crisis of this, and the Parliament, the UK Parliament, has tried to respond, language has changed. So Brexit is very much a word about exit. It's about leaving. Some people thinking it means leaving Brussels, and some people think it means Britain leaving. But actually, the language has moved now to something which I would suggest is closer to a more comprehensive and clearer thought view. But it does involve you starting to see that behind things, which can be a bit of a conspiracy theory, but certainly in the leave and remain vote, we're starting to realise that people feel manipulated in a lot of cases behind things, that the information they were given by both sides was the information of manipulative, hidden at the time, PR companies putting out language which we replicate in our heads, start to get used to when it is replicated enough. That can tire you out as well, in the same way as brainwashing can be, and in the end you found yourself either as a leave or a remainer. But quite a lot of people wanted to keep their options open, voted, but then new information came to light, and rather annoying for, very angry and passionate leavers or remainers, they want a second vote, for example. Now, I'm not talking in favour of a second vote, but I am acknowledging that the danger of being polarised is that not everybody is happy with that when things change. But the word itself suggested it was our decision to leave. But actually, the truth of it is that we're not leaving in that absolute way at all. And we were talking about, and people are only beginning to realise, that we were withdrawing. And that is a better word because it suggests something slower. It doesn't suggest something as absolute. And actually the withdrawal agreement, which put some times and amounts of money and very specific rules, then opened up a totally different process that's called the political declaration, which hasn't even been explored, but is very significant about what the relationship is going to look like. Because our island hasn't physically withdrawn, Europe hasn't moved away from us, we're still talking about partnership and trade and friendship and so on. And those things still need to be worked out. So the problem of the absolute language of leaving is it's not really true. We are leaving some things, and we might be leaving membership of something, but we're still going to continue to be involved. Because that then opens up lots of possibilities, the word leave hasn't satisfied a lot of people recently, and they're wanting before, for example, they may get a public vote, or they may just want to influence in Parliament. They're talking now about having indicative votes, looking at different options, looking at different versions that were always there anyway around this withdrawal agreement. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking I'm on one side or the other, I'm not. If you think I'm messing things up by taking it away from being either or, well, I suppose I am, but not in the spirit of wanting the leavers not to leave or the remainers not to remain. But I want to wave a flag for human beings being as clear thinking as possible, as free in their thinking. And that does involve always being able to see the machinations, the kind of machine-like rules behind what's actually going on. At its simplest, it's a machine that switches on and off. It puts you into a place, a bit like flashing lights in front of your eyes, of a trance place, in a way, where all you can see going forward is either or, is leave or remain. But what's happened recently is that language in Parliament, for example, around things like indicative votes, around, European Union 2.0, Common Market 2.0, is these, for some people, very annoying and anger-creating middle way options, whether you agree with them or not, are pointing to the reality that actually life is more complicated than that. We are creative beings, and outside of this or that, we can often find either and lots and lots of other solutions. Sometimes in life, that's exactly how we work together, how we find our way through. It's not through either or. And it confuses things. But we're confused anyway, it would seem. And I would suggest we're confused because the price paid for people to put us in this either or state is that at the moment, the crisis is so great that a number of people have woken up from that stupor, from that trance, and are actually looking around them and realising that either or doesn't quite capture the possibility in the future. And they're starting to think a little bit more deeply. Now, I don't think that's a convenient thing for the leavers and the remainers who just want to leave and haven't changed their view, but it is a convenient thing for people who want to see things from different angles. So what can you do going forward? It's very simply to look at the language that's being used, and some of it was deliberately designed to put you in a place where you only saw things in terms of this or that, or either or. A kind of machine that just keeps switching your thinking on and off into one place or the other. But the more you look at the sources of the information you're getting, query the language and see if there are other words that you could use to describe the same thing. Seek out different points of view. Try to dig a little bit deeper and see what the motives are in a classic kind of detective story. Who stands to gain from this view and who stands to gain from that view? And though initially this might be harder, this might tire you out, you might sigh with exasperation, it will put you into a place of truth-seeking, of exercising your thinking with a bit more mobility. And you might just find that the either-or answer is still there and that you are still a remainer or a leaver. Or you might find that your view shifts completely somewhere else, or partially somewhere else. You might find yourself in what I call the glorious state of inconvenient confusion, because that is where freedom really begins.